Look, I didn't see Jon Stewart. He's actually quite funny. Look, he's talking about the PACT Act, which is a bill I support. It's a bill most senators support.
Oh, hello. I'm Jon Stewart. Apparently. Quite funny. And I'm awfully interested in what Theodore Cruz is about to say about the PACT Act. Go on.
But what the dispute is about is the Democrats played a budgetary trick, which is they took $400 billion in discretionary spending and they shifted it to mandatory.
One thing, what Ted Cruz is describing is inaccurate, not true. Bullshit! This is no trick. Everything in the government is either mandatory or discretionary spending, depending on which bucket they feel like putting it in. The whole place is basically a fucking shell game. And he's pretending that this is some new thing that the Democrats pulled out, stuck into the bill, and snuck it past one Ted Cruz. Now, I'm not a big city, Harvard-educated lawyer, but I can read. It's always been mandatory spending so that the government can't just cut off their funding at any point. No trick, no gimmick, been there the whole fucking time.
And so it's just part of the out-of-control spending from the left.
They want to buy Hunter Biden cocaine, a crack cocaine, and they want to purchase all your pronouns. Be careful. They're coming for your pronouns. It's nonsense. There is nothing in the bill that is not related to veterans spending. And don't take my word for it. An asshole on an iPhone. Read it. It's at congress.gov. This is for veterans who suffered health effects from being exposed to burn pits and other toxins. That is it.
What the Republicans got made clear is if we leave that spending as discretionary, don't play the budgetary trick, the bill will pass with 80 or 90 votes.
I don't know how many other ways to say this, but there was no budgetary trick and it was always mandatory. And when they voted in the Senate on June 16th, they actually got 84 votes. And you know who voted for that? Ted fucking Cruz and every other one of those Republicans that switched their votes. There was no reason for them to switch the votes. The bill that passed the Senate 84-14 on June 16th has not had one word added to it by Democrats or spending fairies or anybody else. It's the same fucking bill. This is bullshit.
Okay, here's the deal. Republicans like Ted Cruz are on the defensive now because they decided to be partisan hacks and vote against the PACT Act. The PACT Act, for those who don't know, would have expanded VA healthcare eligibility to veterans who are suffering from illnesses related to burn pit exposures. So I'm going to break this down into two parts, whether what Republicans are saying about the PACT Act is true and the actual reason that they voted against it. So first, let's go through these excuses being put forward by Republicans. They claim that Democrats changed the bill in the time between the Senate first passing it and this week when it came up for a vote again. Here's the only change. One single sentence was removed regarding taxable benefits. Here's that sentence right here. That's it. I looked at a comparison of the whole damn bill with the previous version. That's the only change. Quite literally nothing else was different. And if any Republicans are claiming that it was, tell them to show you where. Republicans also claim that a budget gimmick was added. Again, no, nothing was added. One sentence was taken out because of tax implications. If they're trying to convince you that Democrats snuck in a budget gimmick, again, tell them to show you where. Republicans claim that funds could be used for non-veteran issues. Wrong. Here's where it explains exactly what the funding must be used for in black and white in the bill. Quote, 1. The delivery of veterans' health care associated with exposure to environmental hazards in the active military, naval, air, or space service in programs administered by the Undersecretary for Health. 2. Any expenses incident to the delivery of veterans' health care and benefits associated with exposure to environmental hazards in the active military, naval, air, or space service, including administrative expenses such as information technology and claims processing and appeals, and excluding leases as authorized or approved under the Section 8104 of this title. And 3. Medical and other research relating to exposure to environmental hazards. That's it. It's right there in the bill that this funding is limited to only these things. So when Republicans claim that Democrats will be able to siphon off these funds for unrelated projects, the bill quite literally makes that illegal. Now, it would be possible that if the VA moved certain expenditures from the discretionary fund into the mandatory fund, that there would be money in the discretionary fund that could be allocated elsewhere. But guess who would have to approve that? Congress. So when these Republicans say that this money would be moved, it would quite literally have to be with their own consent. That's the only way this happens. So if the VA wanted to move any funding from one fund to another, those very Republicans pretending that they have no agency here will literally be the people who have all the agency. So if they're worried about the allocation of funds, just tell them not to allocate funds. Now, why, you might ask, would Republicans vote against this bill then? Especially considering it is essentially identical to the bill that 84 of them just voted for in June. Pretty simple. Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer announced an agreement called the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a reconciliation package aimed at combating climate change, lowering drug costs, funding the IRS to catch more tax cheats, closing the carried interest loophole so that the ultra-wealthy can't use that to pay less taxes, create a corporate minimum tax for billion-dollar corporations who also seek to pay zero in taxes, and of course, eases inflationary factors. All of its elements are exceedingly popular, and it was written by Joe Manchin, meaning that any claims that this is some leftist fever dream are just pure political theater. But Republicans decided that despite the fact that Democrats are in the majority, that they shouldn't actually be able to use their majority to pass legislation. And so Republicans threatened to withhold support from other wildly popular bills, like the PACT Act, to force Democrats into not passing a reconciliation package. Because somehow, Republicans have convinced themselves that they get to dictate the agenda despite the American people electing Democratic majorities to the House, the Senate, and the White House. Because the only way Republicans know how to operate is basically as legislative terrorists, threatening to sink desperately needed legislation to get their way. They will gladly hurt the American people if that means they can deprive Democrats of a political win. But the problem here is that the PACT Act was so popular, and their opposition to it so nakedly unpopular, that suddenly Ted Cruz and the rest of these Republicans who switched their votes at the last minute had no choice but to concoct some bullshit lie. But the fact is that they know they got caught. They know that everyone can see the way that they fell over themselves to screw over our own veterans because they wanted to throw a temper tantrum over another bill that committed the crime of combating climate change and reducing inflation. So guaranteed they'll try to obfuscate because they've backed themselves into a corner, but we should make sure every single person in this country knows the truth. Republicans voted to deprive funding from sick veterans because they wanted to punish Democrats for trying to help Americans. When they show you who they are, believe them. Before you go, couple things. First, if you want to support my work, the best way is to subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. And second, if you want to see and hear more from me, check out my website, briantylercohen.com. That way you can get links to my podcast, merchandise, ways to donate to voting rights organizations, and so much more. The thumbnail is also right here on the screen, so go check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.